Welcome to the Aro Benaiah Show, the podcast where we share the stories, strategy, and lessons of local entrepreneurs, business builders, shaping the world through their hands and work and leadership. Today, I'm joined by Ken Taylor, seasoned leaders in tech startup and remote operator. Ken has helped our company scale efficiently, building high-performing remote team that thrive without physical office. He is the co-author of Confucian Cycle, A China Siege, and American Decline, and his upcoming book, Working in Slippers Explore, The Future of Virtual Computing, How Remote Work can become a true competitive advantage. From scaling startup to redefining workplace culture, his stories is one every leader and entrepreneur can learn from. It's really a pleasure having you on the show, Ken.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So, Ken, what was it like growing up for you?
Well, I grew up actually in the country in New England, probably very different from where you are, and you're getting 3 feet of snow every year. But my father was an early pioneer in what today would be considered virtual remote work. This was long before the internet. We had a telephone line, and that was pretty much it. And then there was the fax machine. After a few years, we had that available. I remember how excited Dad was when FedEx finally announced that they were going to serve our location, so he could FedEx documents back and forth. And when he needed to travel for work, he'd drive several hours away to the nearest airport and do that. But he developed some of those techniques with being on the phone. I remember many times going in my dad's office, and there he is on the phone talking with someone in New York or Tokyo or Detroit or wherever the case might be. And that was from the perspective of a child. I mean, it's a wonderful thing because sometimes dad has gone on business, but other times he's there. And when he's there, he's there. Okay, maybe he's working, but he's still there. And I have an affection for that myself. I probably worked about half of my career in an office and half of it in a home office, working from home. And I know when my children were small, that was certainly an advantage. And even now that they're grown and gone, it's a lot more pleasant to not have to fight through the traffic on the commute.
Wow, amazing, amazing. It's really amazing. Being that despite your dad was more like some years back, which speak volumes to even if the internet was not more of a big thing then, but he was already working from home. And you saying it, you love it, and it's very very more like very lovely. Being that you still do something related to it today, it's really amazing. So, what was your first real taste of startup life, and how did that shape your approach to building team?
Well, again, my first taste of startups, and my father was involved in tech startups while I was growing up. When I was very small, before we moved to the country, I remember crawling around between his servers on the floor, and somebody having to grab my collar so I didn't hit the power button on an important machine. Then later on, he was in other people's startups, and he would travel around so I knew his friends and the techies and the engineers, and I got to watch from a sort of a ringside seat of not being involved or responsible, being a child or a teenager, but over time, growing to learn and understand of the problems. And as you can see, since I am not calling in from my Learjet, they weren't as successful as some of the startups that you probably heard of and seen on the news. I mean, we had a decent life, but nothing of that kind of wealth. And I learned a lot of lessons about why not, why the startups weren't successful or didn't meet their full potential. So I have seen an awful lot of ways to not do it, an awful lot of ways that things can go wrong. And over the years, I've developed an emphasis on operations. And yes, you have to have an idea, you have to have technology. The technology has to work, but the business has to work. I have been in countless startups where the technology worked just fine. It did what it was supposed to do, but nobody bought it. Or people did buy it and we couldn't deliver it properly, or we couldn't keep the customers happy because we couldn't show them how to use it, and then nobody wanted it, and then the business fails. And so even if you have a wonderful idea, and even if you implement the idea so it works just fine, there is still the challenge of operating the business and making that work. And when it comes to remote work, that makes it a little bit easier because if you are in an office, wherever you are, you have to hire people that can get to the office in order to come into work. Now, if you're in a giant city, there's maybe millions of people that can commute to your city, but you're also paying an astronomical amount for rent. If you are in a cheaper place where you can afford the rent, as some of the startups that my dad tried out the country, well, okay, fine, he can afford an office. But how many people are there that are qualified that can actually drive there and get there? Not very many. With remote work, if you have it set up the business to be able to work that way, you can bring people in from anywhere. You can get the very best possible people. And certainly in a startup, you want to have the very best people because you need to improve the chances of your business being successful. We all know more startups fail than succeed by a large margin. And in most cases, I found the difference is the people and not just the founder. Yes, you need a good founder, but there's people all up and down the organization. In a startup, everybody is important. Even in a mid-sized business, everybody is important. If you don't have the right person in the right seat, the business will not succeed. And having the ability and the flexibility to find that person and get that person able to work at their best productivity is absolutely vital. And remote work can be a very powerful technique for doing that. And I know your listening audience, a lot of them are more oriented towards blue collar work, and you're thinking, well, what's this computer guy, a techie, have to tell me? Well, let me tell you a story from a person that I know that actually has been in this very room making repairs on my plumbing. So this is a plumbing and gas line repair company that is about as blue collar as it gets. I've used them to
Yeah.
fix things here at my house. They have had a constant problem with their receptionist, with finding the right person to answer the phone. Now, answering the phone and taking appointments is not, you don't have to have a doctorate in order to do that. You do have to have some level of intelligence. You do have to have some level of diligence and discipline. You need to know how to use a calendar. You need to know how to either write things down on a calendar or perhaps make notes. You'll put it in the computer. You need to be able to communicate to the plumbers. Well, this emergency came up. You need to put them and go to them immediately, and then to reach out and cancel whoever was supposed to get repaired because somebody's house is flooding. I mean, these are all very important. Your business is not going to work well if you don't have a person that is able to do that in a competent fashion. And these particular plumbers, and I stay with them because they are excellent. They are first class at making the repairs and doing some of the unusual things that I need. But getting a hold of their office has at times been a challenge. And recently, they finally found somebody that seems to be able to do a good job, but that's taken them a very long time. Now, they operate in the old school mode. They do not have a fully remote business, and I live in the country. And I don't know how many people there are that are within range of getting to wherever their office is, but certainly it's less than live in the entire world. And if they moved into being more familiar with able to operate remotely, they would have a lot better chance of being able to find the right person because look, if you're just answering the phone, if you're putting on a computer, you can do that from just about anywhere, at least as long as you
Yeah.
got a decent internet connection. So the tools and techniques of remote work, okay, they're not as applicable to the blue collar. You're not going to be a remote worker if you are the plumber, but there are people that work for your company that are just in front of a computer and a phone. So you can still use those tools to make your business better and more effective and more efficient and higher quality. And of course, if you have higher quality service, your customer is going to care if you fix their toilet. That matters. But your customer is also going to care if you answer the phone or if they make an appointment and you actually show up. And so, who's working in the back office is almost as important as who's doing the plumbing.
Yeah, so key, so key. And this is really an amazing idea. And especially more like this idea of remote job doesn't just apply to the startup alone. Local entrepreneurs can definitely more like buy into it, being that they could have a community of persons who do similar job. Let's say plumbing, for instance, that you make reference of, and in various locations, and being that have more like a receptionist who actually connected one of them together and make reference and schedule them for different jobs around different vicinity at different time, owing to the fact that they know that they do similar things. And yes, it actually really an amazing idea, I must say. Yeah. So you were the third employees at the startup that later went fully remote. So what was the transition like in the beginning?
Well, with the company that I was in called Onerez that I wrote the book about, Onerez was always fully remote. I was brought on as the first non-founder employee. There were two of them, and then when I joined, there were three of us, and the two of them lived on opposite ends of the country. And naturally, they worked in their own home offices. And I went over to the one guy's house for a week or two when I started just to become familiar. But then there wasn't really any reason to be driving all that way, and I stayed working in my own home office. And this was right before COVID. And COVID came when we had, 3, 4, 5 people, and then there certainly wasn't any reason to rent an office because you couldn't be in the office anyways. But we were growing, the business was growing rapidly. I had to hire people, we had to do the work, but we couldn't have them in an office. Well, we'll find them remotely. We'll find them wherever they happen to be, interview them on a Zoom call, get our discussions, set things up on the computer, set it up remotely. And then by the time COVID was over, conceivably, we might have potentially had an office, but we had now several dozen people working for us all over the country. Well, now what do you do? Do you pay them all to move to one particular city and build an office? That could cost a ton, and not everybody wants to move. I mean, a lot of people, they have spouses, they have lives, they have schools. Why would they want to move when they already are? And we were already successful being remote. Why break what isn't broken? I mean, it doesn't need to be fixed. And over the course of working on that, I realized that there are specific methodologies and approaches to hiring people that are a little bit different than the norm. They're not wildly different, and a lot of them are common sense, but the they're not companies have traditionally operated for a while. And I think the key to that is the person, the individual person is absolutely essential. And now you might say, well, of course, when you're hiring somebody, the whole point is to find the best person. Is it really? Is it really? A lot of times I find that people will hire looking for checking boxes. Well, you must have this, and this. Well, to some extent, that's understandable. There is probably some expertise that is required for hiring any person. You want them to know certain things in order to be able to hit the ground running. What really matters most of all when you're hiring somebody to be remotely is their character, their personality. We all know there are some people that just naturally lean into doing a good job. A job not well done is not a well done job. And then we naturally know there are other people that if they can short or skive or do a half baked job, then that's what they're going to do. Now, in offices, managers over many years have developed techniques to try and work with that. Sometimes you see you manage it by walking around. Think about the boss walking through the cubicle warren and looking at everybody's cubicles to make sure they're busy. But if you think about that for a moment, are they really busy? Are they actually doing any work? We all know how to pretend to be very busy when really we're not. Or the hide the boss is coming button. That was on computers when I was a kid. You're playing a game and you hit that button, and it pops up with a spreadsheet. Everybody knows how to do that. So management by walking around and looking at people doesn't really tell you anything. The first key is to hire people that are disciplined and diligent. Well, you say, well, how do you tell that in an interview? Well, it can be challenging. You need more layers than interviews. One way that I found that was very helpful was not to have a standard application process of, well, you just send in a resume and answer a few questions. No, we had a great many questions, a couple dozen questions, some of which were very open ended, like, here's our website. What do you think of it? Here are our support docs. What do you think of it? Well, sometimes a person might answer, it's a pretty green. Okay, well, at least you aren't colorblind. That's good to know, I suppose. But other times we would get a detailed analysis of what they liked and did not like about the website. That tells you something about their diligence. That tells you something about how much they care about this particular job. It tells you something about, do they know your company at all? Over the years, as the company grew bigger, we more frequently found people that had, in fact, used OwnerRes that were our past clients, and they were already very knowledgeable about our system. That is a huge advantage for hiring, and you can tell that by, I mean, you ask somebody that, they'll say that, but if you ask an open-ended question and you see where you go with it, you can learn so much about them, their character, their personality, and their knowledge in ways that are non-obvious and that AI really can't cheat. I mean, what if you were going to ask AI, here's a website. What do you think about it? Well, AI will come up with something, but it's going to be pretty obvious that it's not.
Yeah. It's okay. And that is very, very true. I think more like having more like a system where you actually more like hire people owing to the basis of what they feel about what the company does and everything, so that they will be creative with, yeah, just to see whether they actually pay attention or spend time looking at things. But with the AI anyway, it's not becoming difficult. But still, you can still actually more like spell it out when you ask a whole lot of open-end questions. So how do you actually measure performance and accountability in the virtual environment?
Well, I'll tell you first the wrong way to do it, and then I'll tell you the right way. The wrong way. we all know that there are various monitoring tools that you can put on computers, and the computer will tell you, and it will record and send back to the boss. Well, this is how much time they spent. They were logged on. This is where they went. These are the websites they used. These are the programs that they used. Oh, they spent half the day on Facebook. That's bad. Okay, that is useful. I'm not saying that is irrelevant information, but if that is how you are managing your people, well, first, if you have somebody that spent half the day on Facebook, then maybe you didn't do the best job of hiring. Maybe you should have been a little bit more thorough in your interviewing process. But secondly, set aside the issue of them spending half the day on Facebook. They have a job. They have something that they're supposed to be doing, right? What is that? How do you know that it is done? Are they a call center person? Are they answering trouble tickets? Well, surely there is a log of how many trouble tickets they answered. Did they not answer any all day? Did they only answer two? Did they answer lots of them? Were they doing the job thoroughly and well, or weren't they? And so if that from that perspective, the time that they were on, and even if they did happen to check Facebook, doesn't really matter. If they're doing the job that they're supposed to be doing, and they're doing it at the quality that it should be done, then it really doesn't matter the rest of it. And if they're not doing that job, well, then it also doesn't really matter that they're spending time on Facebook. Even if they're just sitting there staring at the screen, they're still not doing their job. That's bad. So you need to think through as a boss, as a leader, what is the objective things that each person is supposed to accomplish? If they're an accountant, they're supposed to make accounting entries. Are those not logged in QuickBooks? You can see whether they were or were not done. If they're in customer support, they should be answering phone calls. Are the phone calls getting answered? The systems all log that. Are they answering the trouble tickets? Those all get logged. Are they doing sales reports? Well, did you get the report on time or didn't you? Are they making sales? Well, that's obvious. Either they are or they aren't. I mean, if they're not making sales, then you're probably good to get rid of them, right? There's not very many jobs that there is not some sort of an objective evidence and some sort of a standard of productivity that has already been established. Now, that's maybe not the case at the very high level. I mean, like a C level or a vice president, that might not be so easy to judge. But, if somebody like that is spending half the day on Facebook, you've got other problems.
Yeah, it's okay, it's okay. And I think it's very, very lovely being that you measure performance now in terms of what the objective is and what the to-do list is, not just the hours and time actually spent in actually more like in those particular sites without making reference of what and what was actually achieved during the period of why they actually show up. So what tools or system have you found essentially for building strong remote team?
Well, I personally, and I really hate to give plugs to a giant corporation that already has more money than anybody needs, but I
Yeah.
have I have found the Google Suite to work, from my opinion, the best. It has Google Meet, which probably most of us have used. It's kind of like Zoom. I found that to work quite reliably for remote meetings. It has the Google Chat, which having a chat system is absolutely vital because with a chat, you can immediately communicate with anybody in the company. I know a lot of tech people use Slack, and nothing wrong with Slack. It's the same idea. With Google, you also have the workspace where you have Google Docs, Google Sheets, the spreadsheet. They have their equivalent of PowerPoint. And the nice thing with Google is that a lot of companies are already paying them to handle their email. And if you're using Google Workspace to handle your corporate email, you are already paying for all these other tools. You do not also need to pay for Slack or pay for Zoom or pay for any of them. You get them all rolled into the one package, and they do work very nicely together. And also, I know, like for instance, Microsoft Office, and I've used Microsoft Office for more decades than I care to relate. But the Google Suite is better for a fully remote environment. It just seems to work more smoothly, probably because it was designed for that purpose of having multiple people working on the same document at the same time, which is fantastic for collaboration. You can actually see the cursor of other people where they're working and everything on the document right now at the same time that you are. That could be very useful for meetings, or if you have multiple people that are putting suggestions in, or revising a report, so you're not stepping on each other's toes all the time. And I know Microsoft has made some changes to allow some of the same things, but I didn't find it to work quite so nicely. I mean, yeah, I still do use Microsoft Office for other things, but for the remote environment, having systems that were designed for the purpose of collaboration, all kinds of different locations from anywhere, does make life a whole lot easier. But the single most important tool, in my opinion, is a good chat system. Because if you have the chat, you can have it on the computer screen, you can have it on your phone, you can have it on all sorts of devices. And when you have people that lean into the work, that are wanting to be diligent, you will naturally get more work out of them when you allow some flexibility. So, for example, what if somebody needs to cut out and go wait in the go get their kids from school for an hour in the afternoon? Well, hopefully they're when they're driving, they're paying attention to the road. But when they're stuck in line, they're just sitting there. If they have the chat and the email on their phone, which there's no reason not to, they can still be at least somewhat productive. And then when they get home, they'll probably work a little bit later to make up for the fact that they were gone for a while to pick up their kid. But their quality of life is going to be so much better because they're able to actually go get their kid from school and spend time with them driving back. And if they were in an office all day, they don't get home until 7 at night. Well, they're not going to be able to do that. So there, they have gotten a major plus to their to their quality of life that did not cost a cent to the company. It cost you nothing. In fact, it saved you money because you're not paying for an office, and
Yeah,
they're happier,
that's
and
true.
you're richer. What's not to like?
Yeah, yeah, amazing, amazing. Thanks for that. So when a startup actually begins to grow, what is the first sign that it needs better operational?
Well, a lot of times founders, they find that they are so overworked, they're running around in circles, they're working 14 hours days, 16-hour days, and to some extent, that's natural and normal, but you have to think about, your Adam Smith and your law of comparative advantage. Perhaps we've all heard of the Adam Smith's example of the people making the pins, where the one guy can make the pins by hand, and it takes a while. But if you have 10 people and each of them do one step, you get more than 10 times as many pins. And the same thing is true in business. If you have one person, you have to do everything. Are you personally a good salesman? Are you personally good at dealing with customers? Are you personally good at doing whatever it is that you're trying to sell? Are you personally good at accounting? Are you personally good at IT? Nobody is good at everything. I have been in startups my whole life. I have done all kinds of things. I am good at many, many things. I am absolutely not good at everything. So if you are bashing your head against the wall, well, somebody's got to do this. I've got to do this. Well, but if it takes you 6 hours to do it fairly decently, and it takes somebody that's actually good at that an hour to do it really well, wouldn't it make more sense to bring that person on, maybe fractional even, maybe part-time, to do it and do it really well? And that frees up six hours of your time. Then perhaps you can spend 2 hours of them doing something else that you do well, and then 4 hours getting some sleep so your brain's actually working tomorrow.
Yeah, wow, wow, amazing, amazing. I think using more like Adam Smith to make reference of the fact that having more time increase the productivities owing to being that even most times they actually get to work on where their strength is other than just walking randomly without having more like working in where their strength is. It's building a team that each every person have skill in various area really increase the productivity and what's usually more like the outputs at the end of the quarter. And this is really amazing. So can you actually share a challenge you face while scaling and how did you overcome it?
Well, the primary challenge in scaling is, and I know I keep repeating this theme, but it really is the core theme that I have learned in my time in business is how absolutely vitally important getting the right people are. And it is so easy when you're scaling and growing. Well, we've just got to get somebody in there. We've got to get that. We just got to get a warm body, somebody with a pulse to do this work. No, you cannot do that. I've learned this the hard way. I've had it hammered into me by other people that were wiser than myself. No, take your time. Spend the time to find the right person. It will save you so much more time in the long run because if it's the wrong person, either they'll be doing a crummy job and you have to fire them and replace them, or they'll quit and then you have to replace them and you've just wasted your time. You're right back in that again. If you can hire people that are in the right place, give them the tools that they need, they're happy, you're happy, and they will stay there longer. And that pays dividends because you don't have to be constantly retraining new people, rehiring new people, finding, interviewing more and more people just to replace the ones, the revolving door that are coming in, going out, coming in, going out. Think about all the time that you waste in that and all the money too. And it just seems hard sometimes doing the investment up front to get it right, but it pays off so much in the long run. It's like any other investment. If you were running a factory If you had a growing factory and you need to get more machinery to make whatever it is that you're making and selling, are you just going to buy whatever's cheap or whatever you can get that's available? No, you're going to invest the time to investigate in what is the right machine that I need that will give me what I need, that will be reliable, that'll be the quality, that won't be breaking down all the time. Nobody would ever just go and grab whatever off the shelf. They're going to research that machine before they put it in place because it's an investment. They expect to have it for a good number of years doing whatever it is that it's supposed to do. Well, why don't we look at people that same way? This shouldn't be just in and out, revolving door. It should be a longer term because that way you don't constantly have to be replacing it or fixing it, just like you would with any sort of capital equipment.
Wow, wow, amazing, amazing. Having the right team, uh, who you actually can give everything that needed to be done, who will be happy about their job and willing to go the extra mile. And I think this is really, really amazing, being that it's easier to scale that very way when you have people who have the business at heart and they are ready to work and take up responsibility towards yes, yeah, because the scaling is quite very demanding, being that most jobs sometimes are added and sometimes it take a different route, and if the people are not really happy working in your company, it's easier to just lose them, and cost of training will become another different thing when hiring new employees. So how can smaller business adopt remote work principle to compete globally?
Well, the first thing to do is to sit down and actually think through what is important about the work that is being done, what is relevant about where it needs to be done and how it needs to be done. So to return to our example of the plumber, obviously the plumber needs to live wherever it is that you are, that your plumbing business is. That we understand. But perhaps you have an accountant. Do you have a full-time accountant? Maybe you have a contract accountant. Well, are they remote or do you make them come to your office 2 days a week? Why do you do that? You don't trust them to have the receipts in their own home? Well, if you don't trust them that way, why do you really trust them to enter the numbers in your own office? What are you watching everything they do? If you're accountant, if you don't trust them, you've got another problem. Why can't they do that from their own home and save themselves the gas? What about the answering the phones? Well, but this is where the phone line is. Yeah, well, 40 years ago, we're not in 1980 anymore. You could do virtual phone lines that can be answered anywhere. There's all kinds of software and companies that will set you up with a VoIP line. You can even have it set up so it works in a browser. You log into a browser from wherever you are, and the phone will ring right there, and you can answer it using your computer's speakers and phone and microphone. Much like we're doing this podcast from wherever we are. You can do the same thing with the telephone, and your customers don't have to know where the person is. They might be in your town or in the next state or even a different country. Now, you may have to balance. There may be reasons you wouldn't want to do that. If you had somebody on the other side of the world and then they're working at night, there might be reasons they might get a little tired. You don't want to do that. But you still don't have to have them right there physically in your office, even if they are in your town. If they're doing it from their own home, they're still saving an hour a day in the commute and how much in gas? I mean, that's a raise right there. And these things are not terribly difficult. Most every business, even a plumber, I'm sure they must have computers. Surely there aren't people that still do all of their financial calculations in a spiral bound notebook with a pencil. And they must have somebody with a computer and somebody entering in, using spreadsheets and doing your taxes and doing payroll and things. So you must have access to people with computer knowledge. It is possible to get some help in setting up remote systems like the VoIP that I've mentioned, and using Google tools. You could ask your teenage kid. They'd probably know how to use many of them.
Yeah, such a such a amazing,
You don't have to do it
amazing.
all in one jump either. You can just start with one. Just try it yourself. See what you can do that you don't actually have to do in the office. And once you've learned the tools, then you can spread it out to other people. Now, once people learn how to do it and that they can do it from home, yeah, some people still like coming to the office, and that's fine. But you'll find more and more of them. Well, gee, why should I just get out and drive when I could just walk across and do it right here? And then eventually you'll find yourself saving money on office rent.
Yeah, so true, so true. And I think the bottom line here, as you make reference of it, is trusting those who you actually hire to do the job right, so that irrespective of where they are, you know that they are going to do a better job for you. Being that even if in real time you can't even ascertain what people are doing, so you just have to trust those who you actually hire when it comes to remote stuff. And once that is done, and I think it's a very easy way to actually
Well, let me just circle back to that again. As you just said, you just have to trust the people that you've hired. I don't think I would put it that way. I would put it the opposite. You have to put in the effort to hire people that you can trust. And then also, you have to have done the work as the leader to think through and evaluate what it is that needs to be checked and then check it. Because just as Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. You never want to
Yeah,
just trust somebody and don't worry about it, not
yeah,
because everybody is a thief, but because people are absent minded. People make mistakes. There should always be checks and balances. That's just part of human nature. And there's nothing offensive or wrong about that. But it's on you as the leader and the manager to think through what's important to be checked. If what you're checking is, well, did they punch in at the right time of day and punch out at the right time of day? Well, is that really the important thing that you need to be checking?
yeah. Amazing, amazing. Thank you for actually bringing up that time. I think the checking can never be overlooked, being that sometimes, being that some of them are still on training, and even if they got it right, you still need to verify some stuff. And the quote just make reference of that. Yeah, trust, but still verify. Just speak for them.
I'll give an example, even with my own book that I have a. Now this is it did come out. It was released yesterday, so you can order it
Oh,
now. This is a proof copy. I got this a few weeks ago. You could not have done this. Why did they send this to me? I wrote the book. Why do I need to read the book? Well, I need to read it to make sure that I didn't type something wrong or miss something. And even when I read this book, how many times have I read my own book? 1,000 times. I still found a screen full of mistakes that I had to send back to the publisher to get fixed. I need to be checked. I need to be verified. We're all human beings. We all make mistakes. So building that into the system is good practice, whether you work in an office or work remotely. It's essential when you work remotely. As a manager, it's easier to get lazy and not doing it when you're in the office because, hey, I can see they're all there. They all look like they're working. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. You're not doing your job if you don't know for sure based on metrics that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if you are doing that, then why do they need to be there if all they're doing is in front of a computer?
thank you for that, for actually chipping in that. So, what are the hidden financial advantage of going remote or that most executive overlook?
Well, the obvious advantage is, of course, that you don't have to pay rent on computers, but or on office space rather. But the even more important advantage, in my personal opinion, is the flexibility to hire the very best possible people. I have found in most roles, now there are a few entry level unskilled roles where this doesn't apply. I mean, if you're running a McDonald's, then yeah, probably they don't need to be super skilled in order to run the fry machine or the cash register. In most jobs that are up from that at all, there is an enormous difference between somebody that is good at their job and somebody that is adequate at their job. Now, there's a difference depending on the nature of the job, but for example, in software programming, it's well recognized that a truly talented and skilled programmer is at least 10 times more productive, oftentimes even more productive than that, than an entry level junior programmer. They know what they're doing. They are able to write faster. They're able to write more accurately. They have fewer bugs. They don't have to go back and rework and fix things and redo stuff all the time. I have seen countless examples in my experience where a junior programmer fought with something for a couple of days and couldn't figure it out. And a senior programmer looked at it and fixed it in 5 minutes. Now, does the senior programmer make more money than a junior programmer? Yeah, he makes 3 times, 4 times the amount. But 5 minutes versus 2 days, who's being more productive?
Yeah, so true, so true. So true. I think it just speaks volumes to having experience and having leverage here. And I think even remote even give you an apple of time to become more productive, owing to there's no wasting of gas, there is no hold up, there is no whole lot of things that one encounter when it comes to real office compared to being in a remote space where you get to do your job, and it's really amazing. So
Yeah.
okay. So let's talk about your book. What actually inspired you to write your book, Walking in Slipper? And how and what is the takeaway? Can reader actually take away from it when they buy and read it?
Well, I was inspired to write the book based on, of course, during COVID, so many companies were forced to try and work remotely, and a lot of them didn't really know what they were doing. They weren't prepared. A lot of people weren't comfortable with that. And then a lot of companies tried to sort of fake the way of, well, we're going to virtualize how we used to do it in the office. But that's not really the right approach, as I've seen it in technology through my whole career. When you had a computer, Is a computer a typewriter? Well, it does some of the same things that a typewriter does, but it is much more than a typewriter. If you're using a computer like you used to use a typewriter, yeah, that's useful. You're getting benefit from it, but you're only getting a small fraction of the benefits that it can. And I realized that with a remote work, yes, you can do work. You can sort of replicate the way you kind of used to try and run the office. But if you do that, you're not using the full power of the technology that can get benefits that you never even expected or realized. And some of those we just sort of happened into by luck or our happenstance by as we were growing the business. And I took note of those as I was developing the techniques of how we ran things. And over time I realized, not everybody has figured this out. I think that some of my experiences and observations and lessons learned are worth sharing with the wider world because how many companies are there that are wrestling with this? Some of them are remote, some of them were remote, and they're arguing now about going back into the office. Well, is it really justified to spend all that money? Well, but we tried working remote, it didn't really work. Well, why didn't it work? Is it because you didn't know what you were doing? Nobody can be blamed because you weren't trained in that. Okay, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a better way. Maybe if you learned from that and try it again and do it better, it'll be more successful. And then you don't have to spend all that money on the office. And the other thing that I found that I discovered was so many of the people that I had the privilege of hiring, and I'm very, very proud of the team that we built, and people of great many years of expertise, people with entry level, wonderful, wonderful people. And they all wanted to work and to do a good day's work for a good day's pay. And many of them had never really had the opportunity where they happened to be to really blossom and flourish because they were never given the freedom to do so. They had previously worked in jobs where this is exactly how you're going to do it. You don't think you're just a little robot. Well, with remote work, it doesn't work that way most of the time. You're supposed to think, we want you to think, but you need to be trained as to what's important, but that's our job. And once we've done that, then you can put your brain to work for our company and you discover all sorts of things that you wouldn't have never anticipated because more brains are more powerful than even one very smart person's
Yeah.
brain. And that is I mean, it's good for the business, obviously, but it's good for the people. Every human being look, we're not all Elon Musk. I get it. We're not all super geniuses. They're gonna change the world, but we at least wanna change our own little sphere of where we are, and that applies to everyone, even the lowest level, entry-level person. If they have the ability to contribute to something where they are, they will feel better about themselves as a human being, and they'll feel better about the company that allowed them to do that. And there is that not the definition of somebody who
Yeah.
is happy in their work? And so that's something a way that I'd like to think can benefit the wider world. There's always gonna be more people that are entry level than there are gonna be people that are Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. There's only gonna be a handful of those. Most of us you're never gonna hear about. Most of us are just normal people living normal lives. How can we make normal people's lives better? When I was first out of college, I had a job, spending time in car plants. And there were people there, intelligent, decent people who spent 30 years sitting in a chair on the assembly line tightening a bolt. Every 18 seconds as it goes by, they tighten the bolt. And then as years went by, they wouldn't tighten it with a wrench, of course. They'd use that power wrench they lowered onto it. And then there would be maybe a robot doing it, and they were monitoring the robots. But they might have a magazine, they might listen to music, they might listen to the radio, but their brain wasn't really fully engaged because it didn't need to be, and I always felt that was kind of a waste, and so did they, and that's why a lot of these jobs, you work 30 years and then you can retire because they're pretty fried by the end of that. Most people, they wanna have their brain engaged, they wanna have at least some flexibility, and it's the job now in the case of the assembly line, there's probably not a lot of flexibility. It does need to
Yeah.
go along at the rate that it goes, but even there, it was surprising how many because 'cause they're spending all day sitting there on their tail watching things, they'll see things that the engineers don't see, that the supervisors don't see. They'll notice a problem, and they need to be listened to, and that makes them feel valued, and it makes the company better off. Everybody's happier. Why wouldn't you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want to put together a situation that allows that to take place? It's better for the humanity, and, if you think about it, through history, most people have worked from home. I mean, back in the day, and the sailors didn't, and soldiers didn't, but everybody else pretty much worked from home. The merchant, his home was right there above his shop. The farmer, well, his field was right next to his house. He was the lives were integrated. There wasn't this same, you go to work, you come home from work. I mean, they worked probably harder than anybody does nowadays,
Yeah.
but they were still there for their families, and I guess we can't really compare as to happier lives, but I don't think they felt the same alienation from their community that so many people do today. We hear about the epidemics of loneliness. People are just, locked up in the office all the time or don't have any friends and don't do anything. Well, if you have the ability to move around, I'm thinking of one person in particular that I hired who had been in a very senior position previously, was well paid. They were burnt out. We were paying considerably less, but what was attractive about the fully remote is that it was fully remote. She did not I think she actually wound up not even having a home. She would travel in the spare bedroom of her children, that had their own families, and she'd be with one for a few months and another for a few months, and then go down to the Caribbean and rent a house on the beach for a few months and be working from the beach for a few months, and it didn't matter to us as long as the internet's working, what difference does it make,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, amazing, amazing, and it's really lovely being that remote work give you that time to, yes, not just running around, but make you actually more like spend quality time, still being more like within your confined space with your community, with your family, and everything, and still get the job done right. And even with creativity, going to you are thinking of better way to actually improve what you are doing as you keep working on it. The brain is working. How can I get the same results with a shorter time and everything? Yeah, it's pretty really amazing. Yeah, finally looking ahead, what is the future of work in your view, and how can entrepreneur prepare for it?
Well, I think we are never going to get into a situation in which literally everybody works from home. I think that, proctologists are always going to have an office that you go to when you need to visit them. You're not gonna do that on a Zoom call, I don't think. But for any job where the job is always on the phone or just staring at a computer, I really wonder what the purpose of having office. You think about all the time spent, all the pollution, all the traffic, and think about what that does to your stress level. Is that good for your creativity when you spend an hour fighting through traffic before you get into the office? Is it good for your home life when you spend an hour driving home fighting traffic before you walk in the door? I think people can be more creative and more productive in without having to deal with that. And now you're gonna say, "Well, but how can you get creativity when people aren't in the room together?" Well, I think we've probably all seen the stereotype of the young people, Gen Z. We've seen cartoons, right, of them all sitting around in couches looking at their phones. They're texting each other even though they're sitting in the same room. The young people have learned to that's how they interact with people. They interact with people through an electronic media, and we can argue over whether that's good or bad. I'm not necessarily convinced that it's good, but it is the reality. It is the truth, and they are the future, whether we like it or not. I mean, the older folks that predate the internet are retiring, and eventually the time will come when they're gone. There was a time when senior executives did not use email. If somebody sent them an email, their secretary would print it out to them and put it in their folder, and they would read the folder and they would respond. Those executives are gone now. They're all retired. Every executive knows how to use email. They may not use social media. They may not want to do remote work, but they know how to use email. Well, what another 10 years, another 20 years, those will all be gone. Everybody will be familiar with this. And those companies and organizations that don't use the tools where appropriate, in a way that is appropriate and efficient, are going to suffer. Just like a company that didn't want to use email, they're probably still not still around today.
Yeah, so true, and this really speaks volume. Thank you so much for sharing your insight on this, Ken. So, Ken, how can my audience learn more about you, do business with you, and connect with you more?
Well, you can go to the website that my publisher has put up for the book. It is workinginslippers.com. That has links to where you can order the book. You can get it from any regular bookstore. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'd certainly welcome any reviews that you would post to the major sites, particularly Amazon. And I will be reading all of those. And I want to hear back from you, your thoughts. And I'm sure there will be people that will argue and disagree and have other experiences. And I want to learn from that. Perhaps I will do a follow-on book with other lessons that have learned. This is a very new, I mean, it's not completely new as my father demonstrated, but being as widespread it is fairly new. I am confident that, I mean, this is my book and it's really only that thick. I don't think all there is to know about remote work is in this many pages. There's much more to be said than we have not even learned that yet. And I'm looking forward to learning that, and perhaps I'll be the one to document it.
Amazing, amazing. It's really been lovely having this conversation. And thank you for your load of insight into your years of experience. It's really lovely having you on the show.
Well, thank you so much. It's been great being here.
Yeah, Ken, thank you for your powerful conversation. Thank you for sharing your experience or visions for the future of remote work. For our listener, you can connect with our LinkedIn and learn more about his work also at kentaylor.com. His book also, you could actually more like get it on Amazon. Dive deeper into building first remote organization that's truly true. That's fun. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow at the Aro Benaiah Show on Spotify, YouTube, and whatever you listen to podcasts. And remember, every great business starts with someone willing to work with their hands, their hearts, and a vision for something better. I'm your host, Aro Benaiah. See you in the next episode. Once again, a pleasure having you on the show. Ken.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so